So we're going to record to the cloud. That's now being recorded. Okay, so I'm going to move a browser window over here, and I'm going to do this live because I'm going to set up my spring class. Unless someone would like to set up theirs, that would also work. Magdalena, do you want to set up a class for the spring, and we can just have you go through it and share your screen? It's up to you.
I was hoping to, yeah. The thing is, I already have some sort of account because for the faculty assembly.
Okay, yeah, you can use that directly.
I can use that to use in my classes for my students. The thing is that I don't know the password, so I just use it on my phone, but I don't know if I can access it on the computer.
Okay.
Am I gonna need to do that?
Well, I can share mine and we can go through it and we'll be recording, so it will still work. But yeah, what you can always contact them and ask them to reset the password, and then you can just, I use an app called Keeper. Other people use first password or last password. There's various apps you can use to store passwords that are secure, as long as you use a different password for those. Otherwise, if someone knows the password, they can get access to all yours. So it can be a little dangerous, but you can always reset. And I've had to do that on many different programs because I have about 300 different passwords stored in my account, and many times I forget to save them and then I have to reset them. So we're going to share the screen and we're going to go through the process of setting up an account. And in particular, what's going to happen is I'm going to set up one for my class. The first thing you have to do, and I think the people here have already done that, is create an instructor account. So once you have and there you just go to iClicker.com, and it would give you the option of creating a free instructor account. You just give it your first name, last name, and give it a password and institution, and you're all set up as an instructor. But now what the next step is to set it up for one of your classes. So I'm going to go into iClicker.com and I'm going to log in with my password, which I do happen to remember, although I did type it incorrectly the last time. So I'm going to sign it as an instructor, and I am going to, once it loads, my password was already saved in my Chrome browser. And by the way, if you're on a Mac, you have the option of showing your password once it's in that window. So that may be another option if you're using a Mac. If you're using a Windows machine, I don't think that's an option. So I'm going to sign in. So, okay. So now we just worked through a test one I set up just for the past workshop. Well, actually for workshop in the fall. I'm going to create a new course. And this is going to be, you have the option here for full class or only using it for attendance. It's kind of a waste of using it for attendance. The advantage of attendance only is it's free for students, but you could use many other ways of getting attendance. So I'm setting up a full class where I can do polling. And some of this was pre-filled because some of it's going to be the same.
John?
Yes.
You're not sharing the correct screen. I see your calendar.
Oh, okay. I could have sworn I did. Okay. Now watch me. Make sure I get the right one here. I'm sharing. Oh, you're right. I did share the wrong one. I swore I clicked on this, but I was wrong. Here we go. So I logged in. My password was already saved. And I went, I'll back up a step. It asked me here, it showed all the courses I already created. And now it gives me the option of create a new course. And now you can see this, right?
Yes.
Okay, create a new course. And I'm going to choose full course.
What was the thing that you clicked here?
Right at the sign in the top right.
Oh.
So, and then log in with the account you just created. And if it's a brand new setup, it might ask you for your institution. Just type in Oswego. It will show you SUNY College at Oswego. You pick your discipline from the list or whatever is close to it. Mine is actually economics, so I'll leave it there. This is going to be econometrics. And the start date is going to be, it's by default, it's a current date, but the first day of class will be the 22nd. And the end date, I don't know when the end date is. It's somewhere in May. I'm going to go with May. It doesn't really matter where it is, except the course will disappear after this. So let's just say it's before this, I'm pretty sure, but I'll just stick that in for now. The course ID you don't have to use, but I'm going to put in Echo 312, section 800. And the term I'm going to put in as spring semester. This shows up to students. This is 2024. You don't need that, but it's, it's kind of nice so that students, this is more important if you have multiple sections of a class, so that if there's 4 or 5 people teaching the same class, if they see the class times and dates, or if you have multiple sections yourself, putting in the class times and dates in the sections, make it a little bit easier. So this is going to be a 150 class, 150 class on, not in the AM, although it would keep enrollments a little more manageable if it was in the AM. Well, maybe not. Might just end up with a bunch of drunk students. Okay, so 1:50 p.m. There we go. Again, you don't need these things, but it's kind of nice to have it there. It makes it easier for students to be sure that they're in the right section. Okay, so the course has already been selected. The next step is to set up the details. So I'm going to click on this, and then I am going to click on settings. Okay, and now the first page is what you've already set up. Wait, economics disappeared, but I'll put it back. Okay, I don't know why it disappeared. So now I am going to put in next, devices. And here you have the option of using physical clickers or only the mobile app. I normally do mobile devices only, because otherwise you need a physical radio frequency receiver in the room. If you want to, you can do that, but it's going to cost the students more. If it's a mobile app, the college is paying for it. It costs the college $4 per student that uses it per semester. But if the students have to buy a physical remote, then it's going to cost them somewhere between $16 and $50, depending on whether they get the license for 1 semester or for up to 4 years. So, and then they also have to remember to bring it, and they have to have batteries in it and so forth. Mobile devices, they will always have their phones with them or a laptop with them. And we don't have to worry about batteries going dead or them loaning it to other students and bringing them into class and so forth. But it's up to you. You could use remotes only, mobile devices only. But if you're going to use iClicker remotes, you have to contact CTS and make sure they install the receiver in your classroom, the radio frequency receiver, and then they lock it down to the desk so it doesn't wander away. Okay, so now you can choose to monitor student focus, which will show you how often basically students left the app. I generally don't turn that on because sometimes I'll ask them to look something up and it will look like they're not focused on the activity. And so on. If they're working on, sometimes it'll be appropriate for them to go to other things, but that's up to you. It will show you what percentage of time they kept this app open without opening something else in a browser window or some other app on their device. And it just gives you a record of that. So you'll get a report after each session. You could try it if you want. I generally haven't done it. The next thing is attendance. And you have the option of running attendance automatically. So if you know your class meets at at 2:20 or 1:50 or 9:35 or 9:10, you can set that up and have it automatically run, and it will give you an attendance report based on whether they are connected to the device at that time. On the other hand, if you're using the question, if you're asking them questions and you're getting responses, you automatically can tell. If they got a 0 for the day, they weren't there. So that I generally don't do this, but it gives you another field that you could use. And if you want, you could grade it and you can see reports on that. But you could also monitor attendance just by whether or not they responded to any questions. And that's what I normally do. Now,
I mean, they can just sign into the iClicker without actually being in class, right? So it's not really that useful.
Exactly. It doesn't really tell you very much. And what's generally more important is what answers they pick when you give them questions. And we talked about this in the last session a little bit. You could require and set location by, a particular geocode, so they have to be within a certain distance. But that's notoriously bad, because if students are connected on the mobile devices, or if they're in a building and they don't have GPS access, they may be marked as not being in that area, even if they're sitting right in front of you. Because I tried this one time and a few other people have, and it has a remarkably high error rate, maybe 30 or 40%. So I would not require the geocode information. Now, the more important settings are the polling, okay? And let's start at the beginning. Now, the first thing is, the way iClicker works is when you ask students a question, it does a screen grab of whatever is on the instructor screen. And then that becomes the question for the students. It's stored in iCloud, it's stored in there, it's stored in the gradebook and so forth. But the question is, do you want to have students see that question? One way of trying to ensure that they are physically present in the classroom is only send them an image of the screen when the polling ends, because that way they won't see the question on their device. They'll only see it after they've answered it. So if you're using Google Slides or PowerPoint, or if you're just using a Word document and typing things, or if you have things on an electronic whiteboard, it will grab that screen, but they won't see it directly. They'd have to physically be present to see that screen, or they'd have to have someone texting them what the answer is, which is also a possibility. I usually automatically let them see it, because I also run my class in Zoom, and especially in the large classes. So if a student is out attending remotely, if they're I've had students come in from a hospital. I had one person who was out for a couple of weeks, but they attended every class session, and they accepted when they were having tests done. And so I let them see it, because if they're working on a mobile device, they can see Zoom on one screen, but the polling is on a different app, and they'd have to keep switching back and forth. So when they get the question, it's easier for them to see the question themselves, but that's up to you. Some of our colleagues only either do not send a picture from the screen, or does it only after people have had a chance to answer, so students can check it later to see, what questions they missed because they didn't have access to the screen. So that's your choice. And then the results are something that will tell them what the breakdown is at the end of polling. Now, this is one where if you're only going to ask a question once, automatically sharing the breakdown with them is fine. But what many people do, and what I do, and this goes back to Eric Missouri, who really developed the methodology, is we don't want students to see the result after a single round of polling, because a common practice is to ask students a question, for you to monitor what the results are. And if you find that everyone gets it correct, then you can share the results, because you have the option of sharing the results, and that's fine. But if, for example, you find that half the class, say, gets the question wrong, a common practice is then to have them talk to each other, to work at the problem together, to try to find someone with a different answer, and then to try to make a case that your answer is better, and to listen to the other students to see what they say. And then again, you give them a second chance. But for that to work well, you don't want them to see what the breakdown is, because quite often, not always, but quite often, the answer with the most votes is the correct one. So, but you don't want to reveal that until they've had a chance to argue it back and forth, to discuss it and analyze it. And what you'll find is the second time, the scores always go up by about, the correct answer will always gain somewhere between 5 and 20% additional votes after people have had a chance to work it out, where someone will realize, oh, I was wrong. Or someone will say, well, that argument is more convincing. And we always see the second step, nearly always see, 98, 99% of the time, we'll see the second round of voting be much better. And the really absurd answers will generally disappear completely in the second round. So I generally don't automatically send the results out, but that's up to you. Now, in terms of scoring, you can give points based on whether the answer, based on their answers, or some people will use it only for participation. For example, if you're only using it to get measures of students' attitude, in many classes, we had a class in Native American studies where basically people were being asked their opinions, but there was no right answer. In that case, you might just want to give points for participating in each class. And I usually don't do that. I do it based on their answers, but so I give 0 participation points, but if you want to give participation points, and you can do a mix of this. Some people will give some points just for participating and others for getting questions correct. If you choose participation, you could require that you only give them credit if they answer every question, or all but one, or if they answer 75 or 50%, or if they answer at least one question in class. And that's entirely, again, up to your own practices, however you want to use it. Mostly in the STEM field, people do want to base their scores at least partly on whether they have questions that are correct or not. If you have questions where you're just getting surveys, you could do it anonymously, and then in that case, no one gets points for it, but you get survey results.
Can we set this up in this next part?
And then if you want to give points, this is the next part where you give it.
Yeah. So you set that the first one to 0, but we can
right. So I give points based on whether they're individual question responses. And so if they don't answer it, they get 0. Now, what happens is this is a number of points they get a certain number of points for responding, which by default is 0, and they get another number of points additionally for a correct response. The 2 most common settings on campus is either 1 and 1 or 2 and 3. If it's 1 and 1, what will happen is students will get 1 point if they answer, even if they're wrong, and they get 2 points if they answer correctly. So again, they'd be guaranteed, if they're there, of getting at least a 50% correct. What a number of us do, and this is, I think, what Eric Mazur did, was to do something. So that would be just 1 and 1. But what many of us do is we're a little more generous with this. It tends to be a pretty low stake activity. Many of us will give 3 points for an answer and then 2 additional points for correct. And the reason is you don't feel as well, at least many of us don't feel as bad in trying to come up with questions where about on average half of them will be wrong. So the goal is to ask students, you get the most learning gains when students are asked challenging questions where they have to wrestle with it, where the answer is not obvious. So if you assign points like this, if they answer everything wrong, they would end up with 60%. And this is generally like 10%, maybe 15% of the grade in most classes. So on average, a typical person in that case would end up with 80%. If on average students are getting half of them wrong. Now, some of them will be closer to 60, some will be closer to 100, but at least you'd end up with an average score of about 80%, which is generally gives students a more positive feel. It's often higher than some of the averages they're getting on other components of the class, but that's up to you. So you can set it based on the level of difficulty of your questions and what you want an average student to get, basically, in this case. So there it's going to be 5 total points possible if they get it, but again, it could be whatever combinations you want. And that will give you a score for each question to answer correctly. Does that make sense? And again, so the total points is the sum of the points for a response and the additional points they get correct. You also have the option of setting a fixed total, and then you can adjust points for individual questions. This would allow you to make each day's quiz worth, say, 10 points, whether you have 2 questions or whether you have 20 questions. And so you're just setting the total number of points, and then it would be allocated differently depending on the number of questions. But we can do the same thing in Brightspace, and I find this easier by just weighting each one by using a weighted sum, where it's the percent that matters, basically. And that's how I normally do it. But again, you could choose that. It's just a little bit messier. And when students get to see the percent correct, that tends to be fine. Now, when you load iClicker, when it's running on your computer, by default, it will do a count up. And then you have to manually stop it when you do polling. Another alternative, and this is what I generally do, is do a countdown. And the reason for this is there's always going to be some students who are lagging behind. And if you become the bad guy, if you're the one who cuts them off before they get a chance to vote, and if they just see a counter going up, some of them may stall a little bit. A little bit of time pressure is good. Usually what happens though is if it's a really challenging question where they're going to have to spend some time thinking about it, I won't start the polling until the class has had a chance to work through it. So normally I wait until, most students have already come up with a question, a response. Sometimes you can do that nearly immediately if it's just a fairly direct, definitional type thing or fairly simple application. If it's something longer, you can just get a feel for when people are finishing by listening to the conversations, wandering around, and so forth. In a large class, I normally start this at about 1:30 and then taper it down. In this class, there's only about 30 some students, so I'm going to start with let's say 1:15. And then normally what happens, and the reason why it often takes over a minute at first, especially, and normally it doesn't get much below a minute, is some students their device will go to sleep, they'll drop from the network, they have to reconnect or restart the app or something. 1.5 minutes is generally enough time for them to get connected and to vote. And you'll see the responses coming in, the pace of it. If they're all coming in really quickly, you could adjust it down. If they're running out of time, you always have the option of giving them more time in that taskbar that's running. But 1:15, 1.5 minutes is a pretty typical time. And they can change their response if they decide to do it. Only the last answer in that time period counts. So they're not locked in if they happen to press the wrong button. Okay, any questions on that?
Yeah, kind of. Is it possible to give anonymous question?
Yes.
So that I do not see who answered what, but
Yes.
I want to see who answered something. I want to see if they participated, but maybe I want to keep what they answered anonymous. Let's say I want to do like a question at the end where I ask them, if how well they understood, and I want to make it anonymous so that they would be more honest. But I also want to use it as attendance. Is it possible to get the information about who participated, but not how they participated?
I'm not sure. One way of doing that would be by doing it just for participation points, and then it doesn't store their responses or show whether they were right or wrong. It would just give you that. Now it's
not right or wrong. It's just it's a opinion, it's a survey. So yeah.
Right. Now it will give you the total, it will give you survey results, but I don't think that's tied to individual respondents. So I don't think it tells you who participated in that. It will just give you the responses and the frequency breakdown, but I don't think it will give you the specific people who did that. But they may not know that, so you could just do it anyway. I will often mix in some anonymous questions like that with others that are being graded. And then the anonymous ones, I see the results, but I don't see individual people's responses because I don't think it's set up to do it in terms of triggering a point score for whether they responded without tying it. I'm not positive. I have never tried that, so I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. But
there's probably a workaround.
Yeah, there's other ways of working around it. I wonder if you set up the attendance thing. Maybe if you do the attendance thing and then you made it anonymous, then the answers to that would trigger the attendance thing without necessarily showing the responses. That might be a workaround. I'm not positive though. Okay, now quizzing. Here, you can also set up quizzes. This is more for asynchronous stuff. Most people don't use it for this. You could put a list of 10 or 12 questions together and just have students work through it on their own. So if you were teaching a high flex class, you could have questions in class, and then you could store a quiz on this and then have students do it on their own time later. But again, that reduces the security of it. And, it would be pretty easy for students to pass it on. Most people don't do that. If you're going to give other quizzes, most people do it right within Brightspace. But it does have that capability where you can put a quiz, and you could do that at a start of class. Instead of doing one question, you might have a set of 5 or 10 questions that students would work through, and that could be done in iClicker where they just go through it sequentially. And again, it's the same number of points, and you can either share the results for it or not share the results with it. I don't do that, so I'm not sure how that works. Okay, so this is most of the setting. The next step is connecting it to Brightspace. And what we're going to do now is integration. And we're going to choose connect to Brightspace. And I'm going to go to Brightspace. And so just click on go to Brightspace. And you do your network login with all that annoying multi-factor authentication. My phone is nearby. Good. Okay. Okay, I already had logged in through the network, so I didn't have to do it. You may have to do this. Now, here, by default, it only shows you active classes, but not your future classes. But if you click unpublished, it will show you classes for the next term. So I want to do this for 2024 spring for Echo 312. So again, if you haven't activated your class, and probably most of us haven't, make sure you click on unpublished, and that will show you all your classes. Otherwise, this is a recent feature. 6 months ago, we had to make the class active to connect it, and then we could make it inactive again while we actually built it up. But this will pick the classes where you want to use this, and then once you've selected it, you would click next. And if you're doing it in multiple classes, you would just keep repeating. It looks like I only have 27. I thought it was 30, but there are 27 students enrolled so far. Okay, and then you click connect. It's now connected, and then you can sync your roster, and it will automatically add all your students here. And this is now going to, this takes a lot longer with 300 to 400 students than it will with 27 students. That could take 3 or 4 minutes sometimes. And this will give me a list of, this will basically put all of my students in here, and it will also tell me whether these students already have an account or not, because many of them will have an account from past semesters. And it will give me the option of sending an email out to them, telling them what they need to do, where to get the app, and how to connect to the class. And then it will tell me when new students, if students drop the class, it will say, this student is no longer registered. Do you want to remove them from the iClicker gradebook? And generally you'd say yes. They're still there. If they happen to accidentally, they didn't pay a bill and they come back later, it will, put them right back in. It doesn't lose them, but it will remove them from the list of scores. And this is taking longer than it normally does, but it may be a network issue or a Brightspace issue.
By any chance, do you have a template for that, for the email that you send to the students that with all the instructions?
Actually, I don't, because it automatically does it. It tells them exactly what they need to do. So yeah, and you can send a copy to yourself so you can see it. Mm-hmm. Now, there was a new complication introduced this past fall, and that was that we didn't realize this until we're in our second year of using Brightspace, but the Brightspace email was defined at SUNY as whatever email they use when they first use Brightspace. And so what happened is if you had a student who took a high school course at a community college or a college, it would show that as their current email address. And similarly, if you had a student who transferred from another institution to here, their emails would all be going to their former institution. So I had in the fall 48 students who had email addresses other than Oswego. They were able to connect to that, but all their announcements in Brightspace were still going to Adirondack Community College or Cayuga or to Onondaga or to Brockport or some other institution. And fortunately, in Brightspace now, Kathy Dutton put in a little message where it shows students what their current email address is and gives them instructions on how to ask SUNY to correct that so they can be connected to our Oswego email address. They'd still see announcements within Brightspace, but they wouldn't be copied on them in their email. And that was a little bit of a problem where it took a long time to get almost all of my students with that issue were resolved, except for one student who hadn't changed his email address correctly in iClicker until the very last week of the semester, and then I had to sync his grades. But it worked really nicely for everyone else. He was just a bit slow in responding, partly because all of his emails were going to Cortland and he was just ignoring the announcements and ignoring things I said in class, which sometimes students will do.
But they can change it because sometimes they disable those emails so that those notifications might just be going nowhere.
Yeah, and that is an issue. It should be less of an issue this spring than it was in the fall because we only have to deal with new transfers. One would hope that most students would have resolved that sometime during the fall. But
so you don't have to. I don't have to do anything in Brightspace prior to this, like setting some sort of a link or okay.
Now, what it will do in Brightspace though is it will automatically. There's one other thing we need to do, which is tell it how to transfer the grades, but that you have to do after it syncs. You're given two options, and I have no idea why it's taking so long to sync. With my large class, it never took this long. But what you're given two options. One is to score individual grades where you get one grade per class day. The other is just to include a cumulative total. And in general, I find it much more useful to sync each day as an individual grade, because that way you can see what days students were absent, what days they weren't. If they come in and they say they haven't missed any classes, you can say, well, here you did not participate in this poll on this date, and this date. And I find that much more useful than just having a total percentage score. So when you're given the option, which you should do after the sync takes place, and again, it normally doesn't take this long. Make sure you choose, it may be the first time you actually sync grades, make sure you choose, or I'd recommend that you choose sync each individual score as a separate gradebook item. One thing that you then have to do is create an iClicker polling score category in Brightspace. That's something Blackboard actually did that automatically, but here you have to create your own. And every day after uploading your scores, you have to connect the individual scores to that gradebook category. So you assign the weight, if you're using it as 10% of the grade, 12%, 15%, 5%, whatever it is, assign that to the category, and then it will automatically compute the grade as new things are added. But you will have to manually go into the Brightspace gradebook and assign that to that category. Otherwise, you'll get a message saying, that the total scores add up to more than 100%. And then you just scroll down to the very bottom where it will list that day's scores as the last item. And it will do it as session 1, session 2, session 3 with a subheading of the date of that session. So you probably don't, if you want to do test trials of this, create a dummy course that doesn't exist, try it. And then otherwise what happens if you do a test yourself, it will show as students having missed the first day, and the first day will appear to be session 2. I made that mistake when we first switched to Brightspace because I wanted to make sure everything was working. And then I manually edited each one and said session 1, session 2, and just, did it that way. But otherwise, students will see the session number and they'll see the date on the gradebook as that sub-label. And this shouldn't take this long.
Yeah, for me, it's also taking I have like 10 students.
So can I ask a question? I
Sure.
actually found the password, so I started setting
Okay.
it up. And there's a question for enrollment. Students can search for and self-enroll versus students must be invited to this course. Is that the invited? Do you want to check the invited if it's gonna be automatically for?
Yes, and this is what happens. You notice in economics, we use this in pretty much all of our intro classes. So you notice 24 students are already in iClicker. So 24 of the 27 students in my spring class already have iClicker accounts. 3 of them do not. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to view the details here. And these 3 students, I don't think this is a violation. I hope because it's not any scores. These 3 students have not yet used iClicker. And then I'm going to send them a copy of the email, send myself a copy of the email, and this will send them an email. And I'm going to verify that I am not, in fact, a robot spamming these students. So I'm going to submit that, and they are going to get an email telling them what to do to register for the spring class. And if one of those comes up, I will show you. Here we go. So what the messages will look like is something like this. It will tell them enroll in the iClicker class, etc., and so forth. And it tells them what to do if they had a different email. And this went to me as a copy just so I could see what it looked like. So it's not sharing the student information. So there it is. So just enroll in the Clicker class, and it tells them if you don't have it, here's what you do. Click on that link, create the iClicker account, add the instructor's course. Students are first asked for the institution, then they're asked for their instructor's name or the course name. They type that in, and it will show a list of classes offered by that instructor. And then they just click on it, and they're in the class and automatically connected. It's really pretty straightforward. Usually I'll ask them to try it at the beginning, and if they haven't done it, have them connect right then. The most common problem is if they use an email address that's not an oswego.edu one, then they get 2 weeks free trial, but they're not going to be in the gradebook. Just tell them if they haven't done it to use your Oswego email address and their student ID number, and they'll automatically be put in there and in the gradebook. And again, that worked for every student except for the one within a week or so. Everyone else pretty much connected. So, but I think you said you had a couple of questions, sorry.
Oh, me? No, I'm good.
Okay, so that's pretty much how it works. And now we can actually show the process of uploading grades, sort of, because what you do when you use iClicker is, there we go. So here is my, here are my courses. I'm already logged in. In any classroom, iClicker is on the desktop. You click on it. It actually has to do a separate install. It just takes a few seconds, and then you log in. I'm already logged in because we had just done this. And then there would be no join code because students would automatically be put in. I had to do that for the workshop so that anyone could do it wherever they were. But once you're in class, you just click start the class, and then you would just be able to do polls. And so you would click on this, do a poll, start the poll. It was going to choose the display if you have multiple screens here. And here we're going to select that screen. And that's not going to be a very useful question because that's what would appear on the student screen. And then they'd have to pick A, B, C, D, or E. And we'll close this. But normally you'd have the question right embedded there. And then after everyone votes, you would stop it. Or if you did a countdown, it would get down to 0 and it would turn into bigger letters. And I think it turns red in the last 10 seconds as a more visual reminder. And then you'd get to see the results of the voting, and no one answered it this time. But once you're all done, what you would do after class, and by the way, we talked about this in the last session, you can choose the correct answers by just clicking on the correct answer in either the bar chart or on the list of answers, the numeric responses or the free responses, however you do it. Select the ones that are correct right after they do it. So it's highlighted. It'll be green for the correct ones and red for all the others. And then students will see that as they do it. They'll get a running score of how they're doing. And then once you're finished with the end of class, you would then choose to click X And you have the option of doing an exit poll where it just asks them a couple of questions by default. And then you can either do that or you could do an end class. And I'm just going to do an end class here. And then when you go back to, and then you would go into iClicker. Oops, let me close that. Okay, so when you go into iClicker, what would happen? Close, there we go. So what would happen when you go to iClicker is you can then upload all your grades. This isn't going to, we're not going to be able to see all that because my class isn't active and there's no polls yet. You won't be able to upload grades until you actually have responses from students. But I'm going to sign in, and I think we should be able to see some of that here. I think maybe, possibly. I'm going to log in. I got it all saved here. Okay, so, well, yeah, so let me just try it with test. This, what you would normally do is you would go to the gradebook, and then you would see, this is from an earlier workshop, I think. And then you would simply choose export. And then you would choose which sections to export, and would tell you which ones were already uploaded. They'd be grayed out if you already have. And let's say we're going to export class 1 poll. We're going to export. It's not going to go anywhere because this is not connected to a gradebook. But it's giving me an export file, which I could then upload. What it would now do is it would give you, if you have it connected to a class, what would happen is you would have two options. One option would be to sync the roster, and the other would be to sync the grades. You may want to sync the roster first, so it would update whatever the current Brightspace roster is. And then after that, you would sync the grades, select the classes that you want, and then it would automatically upload them all to Brightspace. And within a couple minutes, they just show up as new gradebook entries, especially as long as you do it as a separate column for each day. And then you'd go into Brightspace, edit that, add it to whatever gradebook category it's supposed to be, and then it just gets added to the cumulative average. So it's really quick and easy.
So you have to do this after every class?
You do. Well, yeah, because you have to sync it. It doesn't automatically sync, but it only takes about a minute or so. You could even do it from the classroom, except usually there's someone else trying to get in to go through all the, the authentication stuff. So, but basically you just come in, log into iClicker, you choose gradebook, and then sync the grades, and it will upload them.
Oh, so you don't have to do it right after the class ends.
It doesn't have to be
the same room. You just have to go to your account.
Right, and in fact, you could wait a week or two and then do them all at once.
Okay.
But students like to be reassured seeing that the grades are showing up correctly. And I like to see that the grades are showing up. And also I like to remind students that if they're getting zeros in there, something went wrong, that their account is not configured properly, or they're using a different account, or they are not yet doing it. And I kind of like them to see the zeros if they haven't signed up yet. Now, what will happen is if they haven't registered it correctly, it will still, as long as they use their email address, it will still be showing up in iClicker. It just will be transferring a 0 over to the gradebook. And that's one of the settings you have to do in the next stage of how you treat how you treat missing grades. I treat missing grades as a 0. And then if they later register and you go back and resync the earlier ones, it will put over the correct grade. So there's no problem with that. But sending a signal if there's a problem that they're getting zeros tends to get students, well, with most students, it tends to get their attention more than a blank in the gradebook, because that blank would generally not be that, it's not as visual a sign that they screwed something up. A 0, is a bit more noticeable. And I also color code my gradebook so that failing grades are like marked in a red, grades of C, C minus, and so forth are yellow, grades of B are a little bit brighter yellow, and then B plus and A are green. So it's a nice visual representation when they see their grades too. So, but seeing a lot of red in the gradebook will, with most students, get their attention unless they completely ghosted the class. Okay, and that's pretty much it. Any questions? You know, unfortunately, we can't show much of it until you actually have grades in there. So, but it works pretty nicely. The only additional thing we have to do with Brightspace is manually assign things to that gradebook category. Blackboard, one nice thing I would say about the Blackboard integration is it automatically created a category called iClicker polling scores. Here, you have to do that yourself, and you have to manually assign it to that. In Blackboard, that was all automatic, so you didn't have to make any changes once they uploaded. But it basically, you just go into the gradebook, choose manage grades, edit, scroll all the way to the bottom, and just edit it and assign it to the gradebook category, and it's done. And it's much easier than grading tests or papers by hand. So, you know, and it works nicely even in really large classes.
Oh, I do that too, though. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks. And if you have any questions, let me know. I've been using this for about a decade or so, a little more. This thing, and before that, I was using two other clicker systems. So, you know, I've been doing it for a while. And I only know one person who started using it and stopped using it, and out of all the people who've been here, and that was only because they were concerned. It was someone in psychology, and they were concerned about the time limit, you know, setting a limit time for students who needed more time for things, you know, and that they were, but you can always pick a time that worked for everybody, you know. It's really a low stakes activity, so it's not, you know. So if you have a student who needs double time for testing, you know, you just choose a longer interval, but it gives it to everybody. You can't do it just for one student. So, okay, so any questions, let me know, and I'm happy to help.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.